If you picture a giant of classic literature, you probably imagine a comfortable academic sitting in a cozy, sunlit study with a cup of tea. Politely writing stories about high society, you think of someone detached from the dirt and chaos of real life, observing the world from a safe, artistic distance. But what if I told you one of the greatest psychological novelists in the history of mankind, a man who mapped the absolute darkest and most sublime corners of the human soul, lived a life that reads like an agonizing thriller? What if the man who wrote some of the deepest philosophical masterworks on earth was a convicted political radical who stood shivering in front of a firing squad, survived a brutal Siberian gulag, struggled with a devastating gambling addiction, and wrote his masterpiece in a state of frantic, debt-riddled panic? This is the story of Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. He wasn't just a writer, he was a survivor who walked directly through the fires of hell and emerged to tell us that even in the darkest abyss of suffering, there's a spark of divine light. To understand the profound intensity of Dostoevsky's mind, we have to look at the shadows of his early work. Born in 1821 in Moscow, Fyodor was raised on the grounds of a public hospital for the poor, where his father worked as a military doctor. From his bedroom window, young Fyodor watched the sick, the impoverished, and the dying. He saw humanity at its most vulnerable and broken. When he was just 15, his mother died of tuberculosis, and shortly after, his father passed away under mysterious circumstances. Rumored to have been murdered by his own mistreated serfs, the sudden violent loss of his parents shattered Dostoevsky's world and triggered his first epileptic seizure, neurological conditions that would torment him for the rest of his life. Sent to a military engineering academy in St. Petersburg, Dostoevsky hated the rigid lifestyle. He wanted to build stories and not fortresses. As soon as he graduated, he resigned his commission to commit himself entirely to writing. In 1846, at just 24, he published his first novel, Poor Folk. It was a brilliant, deeply empathetic look at the suffering of Russia's lower classes, and overnight he was declared the next great genius of Russian literature. But the sudden adoration went to his head. His next few books were critical failures, and a depressed Dostoevsky sought meaning by joining the Petrovsky Circle, a secret group of young idealistic intellectuals who met to discuss forbidden utopian socialist ideals. In the 1840s Russia, this was treason. On a cold December morning in 1849, after 8 months in solitary confinement, Dostoevsky and his companions were led out into Semyonov Square. A priest read them their last rites. They were dressed in white execution shrouds, and the first 3 prisoners were tied to wooden posts. Dostoevsky was next in line. He stared at the rifle of the firing squad, calculating that he had 5 minutes to live. The soldiers raised their rifles. The crowd held its breath, and then at the last absolute second, a messenger galloped into the square, waving a white flag. It had all been a cruel, meticulously planned mock execution. Designed by the Tsar to terrorize them into submission, their sentences were commuted to hard labor in Siberia. The emotional trauma of those 5 minutes permanently altered Dostoevsky's psyche, leaving him with an acute, lifelong appreciation for the sheer miracle of existence. Immediately after, Dostoevsky was shackled in heavy irons and sent to Omsk, Siberia. For 4 brutal years, he lived in a squalid, overcrowded prison camp surrounded by murderers and violent criminals. This experience completely demolished Dostoevsky's naive intellectual theories about human goodness. He realized that human beings are not rational creatures who can be easily fixed by political systems. He saw that firsthand that the capacity for monstrous evil and saintly beauty exists side by side within the same very heart. He underwent a profound spiritual rebirth, emerging from the gulag as a deeply devout Christian. When his exile ended, Dostoevsky returned to Petersburg in 1859. He was broke, his health was failing, and he inherited a mountain of crushing family debt. Desperate for money, he fell into a destructive gambling addiction losing what little cash he had at the roulette tables of Europe. Hunted by ruthless creditors, he signed a predatory contract. If he did not deliver a complete novel in just 26 days, a, a cynical publisher would gain the legal rights to all of Dostoevsky's past and future works forever. With his life on the line, Dostoevsky hired a young stenographer named Anna Sinetkina. Working day and night in a feverish, coffee-fueled frenzy, he dictated his novel, The Gambler. He delivered the manuscript with only hours to spare, saving his career. Anna would soon become his second wife and the emotional anchor who finally brought stability to his chaotic life. With Anna by his side, Dostoevsky entered the most prolific period of his writing, a series of monumental masterpieces that would change world literature forever. In 1866, he published a completed copy of Crime and Punishment. It is the psychological autopsy of Rodion Raskolnikov, a brilliant but impoverished student who murders a greedy old pawnbroker to prove he stands above ordinary morality. But instead of feeling liberated, Raskolnikov is instantly consumed by paralyzing, feverish guilt. Dostoevsky uses this gripping detective story to show that if we abandon objective morality and try to live purely by cold human intellect, we end up destroying our own humanity. Next came The Idiot, where Dostoevsky explored what would happen if a truly perfect, good, Christ-like man were dropped into the corrupt, cynical world of high society. Through The Gentle Prince Mishkin, Dostoevsky explored how deeply uncomfortable a corrupt world becomes when controlled with the absolute truth. In Demons, written in 1872, Dostoevsky turned his gaze towards the political landscape. He wrote a prophetic warning showing how radical nihilistic ideologies that claim they want to build a political utopia on earth will inevitably end up creating a totalitarian nightmare of terror and bloodshed if they destroy moral and spiritual values in the process. Finally, at the end of his life, Dostoevsky produced his crowning achievement, The Brothers Karamazov. It is a massive, sprawling family drama centered around the murder of a cruel father, where each of his three sons represent a different side of the human condition: physical passion, hyper-rational, and spiritual. The heart of the novel is the famous Grand Inquisitor chapter, which challenges the ultimate question: if God is good, why is there so much innocent suffering in the world? Dostoevsky's answer is not a neat philosophical formula, but a call for active, self-sacrificing love. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky passed away in 1881 at the age of 59. His funeral in St. Petersburg was a massive national event attended by tens of thousands of people, from poor peasants to wealthy aristocrats, all united in grief for the man who had understood their collective pain. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky left behind a legacy that fundamentally reshaped our understanding of human psychology. Years before Sigmund Freud began analyzing the subconscious, Dostoevsky had mapped its deepest labyrinth corridors. But Dostoevsky's ultimate message to us was not one of despair. He knew the absolute depths of human cruelty, madness, and grief because he had lived them. Yet despite it all, he believed in the ultimate human triumph of the human spirit. He showed us that our suffering is not meaningless and that we cannot find true light by ignoring the dark, but by having the courage to walk straight through it. Dostoevsky taught us that life without any spiritual contact with the real and living God would just end up being a life of cruel, cold cynicism, which would end up in self-hatred and hatred of others. And one of his most greatest critically acclaimed masterpieces, which was read by Friedrich Nietzsche, and Nietzsche himself wrote a letter addressing the brilliance of this book, Notes from the Underground. He displays this beautifully as a man who was very, very wise but could not take his own advice and the advice of others, and since he hated others so much, he lied to himself. And when he started lying to himself, he couldn't trust other people because he didn't trust himself. Therefore, he ended up hating the world and himself. And that led to his self sabotaging massacre of a life. In the end, Dostoevsky just wanted to teach us how to function in a cynical world, how to progress through life without falling into despair like most of his characters. Although most of his characters in his big works end up committing murders or are manipulated into committing them or commit them out of their own free will, Dostoevsky teaches us that there is no life that is worth being extinguished, and there is no life that is worth being put to an end. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky has been dead for almost 2 centuries now. But even now, he's taking most of us to class by the depths of psychology that he has explored. What a life, and what a great man that has lived and passed away without any of us actually meeting him. This was the life of Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, one of the greatest writers of all human history.